We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Thursday, 10:30 Eastern Time, coming to you live on rumble.com/amradpod and on YouTube, the American Radicals Podcast, also at X America News. If you prefer, because I have a face for radio, to listen to the audio format, you can always do that on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart. After we get done recording the show, we will drop the audio there Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And as a reminder, a humble request on this Hobbyist podcast. Please just do all the things. Give us a thumbs up, a follow, a subscribe, a share, all the things. And then maybe just tell a friend or 12 about the American Radicals Podcast. We're trying to expand out the brand, not just trick those algorithms, but actually word of mouth does have an impact. So tell some friends about the program we have here today, where we're endeavoring to radicalize as many Americans into our commonsensical way of thinking as possible on, again, this Hobbyist Podcast. I am, after all, an American citizen with a First Amendment right to share his opinion on things that are open source, current events, things in the news, nothing classified, not revealing any sources or methods, and definitely under zero circumstances representing any particular agency, department, arm, or bureau of the federal government of the United States of America. However, today we're going to be talking about the federal government of the United States of America, at least one of the founding documents of it. And I promise we won't nerd out too much, but it is going to lay the framework for what we're going to talk about today, which is promoting the general welfare, which comes from this pesky document, the preamble. One that you might have actually had to memorize and recite in school, but just let's go back to some 3rd, 4th, 5th grade civics here and give it a read as a refresher. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Promote the general welfare. I am pedantic about language. I understand that. I do it for some comedic flair at times, but I also think that language is very important, which I cover down on because language can lead to your mindset. Promote the general welfare. Do you think 250 years ago, the guys that put down the quill to parchment, promote the general welfare, could have foreseen the way that that term has been bastardized as it is today? In fact, it's been turned into 180 degrees photo negative of what it was originally intended to be. Now, we had a mission statement where we mentioned a little phrase that we are all granted by our Creator with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That doesn't come in the Constitution, no, Benny Johnson. It comes from the Declaration of Independence. That's the mission statement. The Constitution is the framework. They work together. It's a nice symbiotic relationship that they have together. Now, when I read promote the general welfare, and through the eyes of the individuals who put quill to parchment and wrote it down, promoting the general welfare means that the government is going to exist so that you can pursue your happiness, be entitled to your liberties, and have your life. And that's about it. It doesn't mean SNAP benefits for 40 million people. But now, because that term has shifted in the way that it's interpreted, the government is doing something that is the photo negative, 180 degrees opposite of what it is intended to do, and which is a problem, which we're going to get into today. Because the Charter of Negative Liberties, that is the U.S. Constitution, where it actually documents the very finite amount of responsibilities that the American people expect with its social compact, with its government, which we established so that it can protect us against fraud and force, protect the borders, coin some money, maybe make a treaty here or there, and that's about it. Negative liberties. It basically says things you can't do at all. Everything else belongs to us. But the Barack Obamas of the world came in and said they wanted something that was positive liberties, things that the government is compelled to do on your behalf. very opposite of what JFK talked about with ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. But Barack Obama and his ilk, the communist, Marxist, leftist of this country now who have gotten to the grips of power and figured out the hack to get so many people to their way of thinking and accepting government overreach, have now bastardized the term promoting the general welfare. And it means to too many people, what kind of goodies can I get from Uncle Sam? So I want to talk about it through the vein of the stories that I encountered today. And that is going to be illegal aliens and legal immigrants who love America, according to some polling, pushing back on big tech, education reforms to prepare our workers for the future, confronting some of the economic strife for younger Americans, and defending some religious liberty. And even if we have a little bit of time, I'm not sure if we'll get to it. Maybe we'll have to save it for a Saturday show. An FBI after action review, as we are now 2/3 of the way through November, and it's worth going back to what's happened over the last 3 weeks. It's a lot of stuff. But all of it is actually through an original piece that I found from the New York Times, which involves car batteries and lead poisoning in Africa. We'll see if we can square that circle in a moment. But let's thank our underwriting affiliate of the day before we get to all of that and so much more on this American Radicals podcast, Thursday edition. And that is going to be the affiliate of the M-Clip Company. Everybody, go to m-clip.com. m-clip.com. Luxury goods, money clips, made in America, sleek looking, lifetime guarantee, family owned business. Been in business 20 years at this point. Like I said, it is a lifetime guarantee. You mess it up, they will fix it for you. You can get them uniquely made to have your initials on there, your favorite baseball team. They got some cufflinks and some leatherware. They even have the suspendables line. If you're fans of us here, if you like doing the right thing at the right time in the right way for the right reasons, you can get the suspendables badge and our logo and our emblems all on there. And if you use the promo code suspendable, you get 10% off. So you have some nice money to put in your money clip. And again, an affiliate of the program. We don't take any money. We just like to support American businesses here, which we're going to continue to do on this hobbyist podcast as long as the audience is here to listen to it. So what are you going to listen to today? We're going to have to start from the New York Times, which is at one point a newspaper which was decrying some of the atrocities, human rights abuses, and I'll be fair, I think they are, over in Africa, and connect it back to promoting the general welfare in the United States. So the headline, recycling lead for U.S. car batteries is poisoning people. And you can tell if you're watching us here on the American Radicals podcast on YouTube or on rumble.com/amradpod or at X America News. The New York Times invested a lot into this piece. It's thousands of words. There's animations all over. They sent people over to Africa. It is written by 1, 2, 3 different journalists, and it's pretty sleek. They did a lot of work for it. Well, let's find out what it's about and connect it to what we're going to be talking about today. So from the piece, as the United States tightened regulations on lead processing to protect Americans over the past 3 decades, finding domestic lead became a challenge. So the auto industry looked overseas to supplement its supply. In doing so, car and battery manufacturers pushed the health consequences of lead recycling onto countries where enforcement is lax, testing is rare, and workers are desperate for jobs. So the New York Times actually sent these 3 individuals, or at least one of them, over to Nigeria, to a small town called Ogijo, Nigeria. I'm probably mispronouncing it. However, I don't think the people there watch the AMRAD pod, so I'll have to apologize to people who will never, ever consume this content. So from Ogijo, Nigeria, there's factories in and around this town. They recycle lead that is then used in things like car batteries. Bring this piece back up here from the New York Times. The factories in and around recycle more lead than anywhere else in the entire continent of Africa, in this small little town. The U.S. imported enough lead from Nigeria last year to make millions of batteries. Manufacturers that use the Nigerian lead make batteries for car makers and for retailers like Amazon and Walmart and Lowe's. Now, the auto industry here in the United States, they talk about battery recycling. It's to save the environment. staying green. We want to be good stewards. I'm not going to say that they're worshiping the sun monster, Gaia, or anything like that. I think it's actually a good thing to recycle the lead so we can reuse it. Now, the way that it's billed by the auto industry, according to the New York Times, at one point, a newspaper, lead from old batteries, when recycled cleanly and safely, can be melted down and reused. The battery makers rely on the assurance of the trading companies that the lead is recycled cleanly, and then they rely on audits, which just make recommendations. So there's not really any enforcement. The regulations here are kind of similar to the way that coronavirus worked in this country, where you had school boards and then you had the CDC, who just kind of ping pong responsibility back and forth to each other, because the CDC would come out with guidance, very much like these auditors would come out with recommendations. And then the school boards would say, oh, we're going to follow the guidance. And the parents would get mad at school boards and say, well, the school boards would say, we're just following guidance. But then you go back to CDC and they're saying, well, the guidance isn't a law. They don't have to. And that's the way that they avoid responsibility. And here, this is the way that these lead recycling facilities are avoiding responsibility. They're getting these recommendations for the way to make things operate more cleanly and efficiently in accordance with health guidance, but they're not really required to do it. They're not punished too much for it. So back to the piece. All this is avoidable. All these health consequences they have, where they have little kids that have lead in their bodies. And there's no safe amount of lead, by the way, if you're wondering. Any lead is kind of a bad thing. Lead batteries can indeed be recycled as cleanly as advertised, but that requires millions of dollars in technology. Now, here's the going away point that I want to bring it to when we're talking about promoting general welfare. From the New York Times, quote, across Africa, governments have had little awareness of the harms of battery recycling, instead focusing on jobs and foreign investment. Well, those countries, which are often ruled by a warlord or warring factions or monarchs who actually have no power, just ceremonial role in their country, they don't have the same charter of negative liberties that we enjoy here, or at least allegedly endeavor to enjoy in this country, where we spell out very specifically what the government can do, its finite amount of responsibilities. And we demand that it promotes our general welfare, and that is in the form of allowing us to have life, liberty, and pursue our happiness. Now, in Africa, and Nigeria specifically, which they talked about in this piece, their lives are getting lost because the government is not obligated to do what is necessary to protect them against fraud and force. It might come in the form of these recycling plants, which are exploiting these people who are working for pennies on the dollar. And at the same time, they're hurting the health of the communities. Kids are dying from lead poisoning because of the fumes going into the air or going into the water supply. People who don't even work in the factories are keeling over and dying. The governments are not fulfilling that responsibility, and they're not obligated to. They don't have that agreement. Promoting the general welfare in these countries is more of a positive understanding. The positive understanding would be, let's bring in all of that cash that we can so we can bring in the tax revenue, and then we can benefit ourselves, line our own pockets, because we're just warlords after all. It's only a matter of time before somebody comes up and lops my head off and takes over. So personally enriching themselves. And even a more benign explanation would be, well, I give you a job opportunity. Look, you can go out there and you can aid and assist in this recycling plant and maybe bring home a few extra pennies to your family and hopefully be able to pay for anything, even though our economies are just completely broken. You're not going to be able to buy anything with the money that you have. That's all of this in relating to promoting the general welfare, because those countries, particularly here in Nigeria, do not have that obligation. The downstream consequences, because people there are expecting the goodies from the government rather than the opportunity that it's supposed to ensure: life, liberty, pursuing their own happiness. They're victimized, they're exploited, they're vulnerable. Now, that got me thinking along the whole lines of promoting the general welfare and how we're a little bit different in this country, allegedly the land of the free. So let's talk about some of the illegal aliens who have coming over here in this horrible country that we've been assured by the likes of the New York Times, at one point a newspaper, or the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, or any of these leftist, Marxist, communist rags that are out there. America is awful. Everybody hates us, except everybody seems to want to come here. Now, why do they want to come here? Let's connect it to this piece that comes from the New York Times and this organization KFF, Kilo Foxtrot, which conducted a survey of immigrants. Now, they commingled illegal aliens with legal aliens because they wanted to make sure that it wasn't so accurate. They wanted to get their point across. But from the poll, the headline is KFF New York Times 2025 Survey of Immigrants Worries and Experiences Amid Increased Immigration Enforcement. They're very worried about the ICE coming to remove them from the country. So, some of the takeaways from this survey, which was from KFF New York Times, 41% of immigrants say they personally worry they or a family member could be detained or deported. Well, if you're legally here, I don't know why you would worry about that. So let's just say that everybody who's illegal is probably worried about it now that there is a mandate from the president who was elected on the backs of a promise to do mass deportations of illegal aliens. And he's mean, orange, and literally Hitler and trying to do that. Not enough, I would argue. I think we're way, way inefficient and under deporting the amount of people. More than half of immigrants, 53%, including majorities of naturalized citizens and lawfully present immigrants, are not confident they or a family member would receive fair treatment. Why would they come to that conclusion? They are, after all, legal immigrants, naturalized citizens who allegedly studied up on the Constitution, took a naturalization test, swore allegiance here, vowed to become part of our melting pot. The fondue, not the borscht, where we kind of stay separate. I don't know why they would have that conclusion. Now, when they got briefed up on their naturalization test, I'm sure they had to look at least temporarily at a preamble to a document which spells out what our mission statement was and puts it down on paper about a social compact promoting the general welfare. Why did they come here if they're worried about getting naturalized and then folded into our system and then just being removed? Why would they have that sort of understanding? Well, I think that they probably have a misconception of what general welfare means. To them, it's probably give me lots of goodies, not giving you the opportunity. Now, the adjoining piece that comes from the New York Times, where they report on this and they decry the likes of the ICE officials that are out there, the immigration guys who are getting it done, trying at least to deport illegal aliens on behalf of the president, who's mean, orange, and literally Hitler. The headline is, under Trump, immigrants are more fearful but determined to stay. If you were afraid, why would you stay in a situation? Well, it could be good, it could be bad. From the piece, 70% of the people who were polled said that they could go back in time, they would still make the choice to come to the United States. Is it because you have an opportunity here? Yeah, that's great. Or is it because they get lots of goodies? It's not really spelled out. But I think it gives an overall, blows up the narrative that America's awful when 7 in 10 people who came here said, yeah, that was a good decision for me, even if it is so they can get the SNAP benefits. Large majorities said that their financial situation is better. Well, no stunner here. You don't work for pennies on the dollar. They said their employment situation is better. Educational opportunities are better for their children. And then still about half said that it's safer here. So we're kind of killing it across the board on all of these issues that are quality of life matters. And the reason that we do is because we still have the remnants, the echoes of something that is contrary to what we see in Africa, which is a promotion of a general welfare that entails your ability to live, have freedom, and pursue what your happinesses are, whatever that endeavor is, acquire property, not things that are just giving you out goodies on behalf of Uncle Sam. When we default to the secondary, the latter interpretation of welfare, what's no longer just protecting you against fraud and force, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and it becomes things we must do positively on your behalf. Well, that's when we're going to resemble the Nigerian form of government. And that's when these numbers are going to come down, because people who legitimately came here for the right reasons to fold into the melting pot will say, hey, you're resembling exactly the hellscape that I came from. And people that came here for the less than benign reasons, for the more nefarious purposes, to just belly up and get onto the government teat, well, those benefits aren't going to be there because we're going to fold. So there will be way less happiness attached to it. But I think it's worth bringing up again to just blow up the narrative about America being awful when essentially everybody who came here is generally pretty happy with it. The reason they're happy is because our system, even though it is on the decline, if I had to make an honest assessment, if I really was looking at the timeline of us as a country, unless we course correct, we are on the back nine here, folks. At least we have certain remnants and echoes of what we were originally intended to be about. And as a result, we're enjoying those accoutrements that exist downstream of that, of allowing the people the freedom to pursue what they wanted and not have an over incumbent government, which is obligated to give them stuff at the same time. When you obligated to give you stuff, it also intrudes in your life. And along the lines, again, of immigration, this is going to be legal immigration. And this is going to be how we sort of maintain our country as it stands, maintaining a melting pot, a fondue rather than a borscht. If you're going to allow people to immigrate here legally, of course, going through all the bureaucracy, all the red tape that's necessary, like my wife did when she immigrated here 25 years ago and was so proud that she still has the sticker of the time that she voted. That's how much it meant to her. Not like the people that came here and with their hand out and saying, give me free stuff. If we want to actually be a place that people endeavor to come here to fold into our society, reflect back our values, and embrace really the tradition of being an American where you have an opportunity, but not a promise. We do have a safety net. It's not a hammock. We're a charitable good people, but we're not going to allow you to come here and just suck off the teat of our government. We want you to embrace what you can do here, bring your skill set. At the same time, you're going to have to fold into the way that we do things culturally. Those sorts of people. Well, the Trump administration has kind of raised the bar, which the New York Times is very upset about. So from the New York Times, the headline here, Trump made the citizenship test harder. What if every American had to take it? And it's an opinion piece, but worth going into. There are a couple sample questions from this new citizenship. Name 5 of America's original states. It used to be 3. Now you have to name 2 more. So they've raised the standard, I guess, by 40%. Explain why the Federalist Papers mattered. So you actually would have to know what the Federalist Papers were and who wrote them and what they were arguing. From the opinion piece, why do we expect so much less from current citizens? And I don't hate that. I think that there should be. But at the same time, if you are endeavoring to come here from abroad, you should be of a higher ilk. You should bring something to the table. We have our own slugs to deal with. The United States administers citizenship tests because it assumes you need to know some history and background on how our government works in order to be an engaged citizen. I think that's a fair assumption to make. But we have to go back to the way that the New York Times thinks, and they go to a woman whose name is Kelly Rose. She's an AP teacher, advanced placement, world history. She's in Chicago, and she said, quote, "You're not going to be tolerant of Muslims if you don't know that the Abbasids, which is a caliphate dating to the 8th century, once ran the show." So I don't know why that relates to being an American, but she wants you to find out about a caliphate. She added dryly, "Inquiry-based learning is not going to help me when I'm in the voting booth." Inquiry-based learning, I had to look that up. So inquiry-based learning, just as an aside, here's the definition of it. Learning to frame good questions matters more than actually learning the stuff. So just, I don't understand. Can you explain that to me more? That's more important. I guess that's job security for an advanced placement teacher. If people are always asking questions, she'll always be a teacher. Miss Rose's school students can take a class combining American history and literature, which could be good, could be bad. If it's taught thematically rather than chronologically, I don't want to hammer people with dates and locations. I want them to know the general history. I think that that's more important. It gets them generally more engaged. If you have an opportunity to read literature and make it more interesting, that's a good thing. But what winds up happening is we combine history with the themes that the likes of Kelly Rose want to get into. And as we send it off here, the final part, this is again, back to Kelly Rose commenting to the New York Times on a piece. Trump made the citizenship test harder. What if every American had to take it? We need to put they too may have only the vaguest idea when the Civil War was fought, students are expected instead to analyze key historical events and contributions of individuals through a variety of perspectives. And they wanted to make sure that people studied underrepresented groups. So we're just going to explode history so that people have a resentment of the government, not really a fundamental understanding of why it was stood up to begin with. I think that'll end really well for us. Don't you? When people learn to resent the government for not being based on a charter of positive liberties, not giving you the goodies that it needs, as opposed to what you should be if you're actually studying civics and reading the preamble, maybe memorizing it even here, as so many kids did when they were in third, fourth, or fifth grade, reciting it back to the teacher for a grade. You have a greater overall understanding of what the founding document is, so you're a more informed citizen, and you realize that you should not be putting people into positions of power who promise to give you lots of goodies. It should be people who want to get the government out of your way so you can enjoy your life and pursue what you want without any sort of intrusions. But because it's the New York Times, it was one point a newspaper, but it's the leftist, Marxist, communist rag. It's publishing opinion pieces saying that we need to talk about underrepresented groups and teach people just how to ask questions from their teacher who thinks it's really more important you to find out about an 8th century caliphate instead of what promoting general welfare is, because general welfare to her is lots and lots of SNAP benefits. Now, that's not limited to the Chicago school system. We can hop on over to the Pennsylvania school system, and this comes from uspie.org. Maybe that's way, maybe it's USPI, but it's the United States Parents Involved in Education is the acronym. And they want to talk about media literacy being taught in the state of Pennsylvania, which is actually just teaching people to trust only left-wing news sources, or at least a vast, vast majority of them. The state of Pennsylvania is pushing, as they call it, media literacy education in K through 12 schools. There's a tools kit. It promises to prepare kids to engage in critical thinking with media and the digital world, because we don't want them to be fooled by deep fakes. Who should they trust? Well, according to this media literacy toolkit being propagated to all K through 12 schools, public schools, government funded by you if you live in the Keystone State, NPR, BBC, Guardian, Reuters, Al Jazeera, The Hill, Vox, Associated Press. They're all listed as trusted. And actually, an assessment found out that it was a 6-to-1 ratio of left to right-leaning sources. And the right-leaning sources were ones that were saying that Donald Trump was mean orange and literally Hitler. So congratulations to school districts in Chicago or writ large across the state of Pennsylvania, where your governor's all in for this media literacy kit, because he's elected to bastardize their people's understanding of the way the government is supposed to function. That's not promoting the general welfare. That's allowing the last fumes that we've got in the tank here, where we have this understanding of what our mission statement actually meant when it was put into function as a government. We're just going to let that drift away, and hopefully people will no longer question because they just read Al Jazeera or The Hill, which gives them information that they can imbibe about daddy government, how it's obligated to give you lots and lots of free stuff. That's ugly. And this is a different subject, but I guess also ugly, and that involves big tech. Because if we're going to promote the general welfare in the constitutional, traditional sense, I don't think it's promoting anybody's life, liberty, or happiness to allow gigantic monopolies to seize onto power and gain economic influence and political influence, because their founders, like Jeff Bezos, are friends with so many people over the DOJ that they can just send a lobbyist over there and have them charge my friend Amy Nelson's husband, Carl, with a crime that he never committed. And then when it gets overturned, bring a civil lawsuit to try to financially bankrupt that family, a happy married couple with 4 little girls, because retribution. But that's Amazon, and they're brought up here. And if you're not concerned about the Nelsons, are you at least concerned about your streaming capabilities? Because according to The Blaze, Amazon wants Warner Brothers so it can rule your screen. This comes from Aidan Buzetti. It's an opinion piece, but brings in some news that's worth getting into. Last year, Prime Video which is from Amazon, topped the United States streaming charts for the third straight year. It's not Netflix, it's Prime. Amazon controls a sprawling production studio reinforced by its 2022 purchase of MGM. It holds sports rights like Thursday Night Football, and they have a deal with the NBA, which I don't think anybody really watches, but maybe I'm misinformed on that one. Now, with the deal sealed, Amazon would control more than a third of streaming video, and that's if they're able to acquire the Warner Brothers studio. They'll control 1/3 of all streaming. Amazon doesn't need Warner Brothers to survive. It wants it to force more Americans into the digital universe, dominate even larger share of the market, and use that to trap you into their product and raise the prices. I mean, who here has watched Amazon Prime when we paid a fee to not have commercials and now we have to sit through commercials and every single commercial is a gay person or some sort of racialist? I saw a commercial on Prime recently that involved people that spoke English as a second language speaking English to try to normalize folks who were coming from third world countries and coming here, not folding in. I mean, I guess they technically were because they were speaking English, but that was for our benefit. It was more just to raise awareness that we need to be balkanized in the country. And if we empower Amazon to do that, they're going to enrich themselves. That's not good. But at the same time, we do have some apparatus. We do have a social compact in place for some people that look at the horizon and see that big tech is growing increasingly more and more powerful. It's going to impact your lives every single day more than it has already. And it's basically in your life at all times, all the time. Because if you have a phone, it's a supercomputer in your pocket. But there is a mechanism, there are some mechanisms for those in government who actually see the problems that exist. And that is if there's a big tech that's going out there and is intruding on people, either through force or fraud, or even their ability to thrive, life, liberty, pursuit, and happiness, that needs to be called out and needs to be rectified. So we'll go to my state, the land of milk and honey, Florida. We have an attorney general, James Utmeyer, who's bringing a lawsuit not against Amazon, but against Microsoft. And I think that this is an objectively good thing and should be highlighted here. So this is actually a screen capture of the letter that James Utmeyer sent out to Microsoft, accusing the company of discrimination against faith-based nonprofits because government exists to punish good. And if it doesn't, by default, it will punish it exists to punish evil. If it not, then it will in effect punish good. So Microsoft is discriminating against faith-based groups, and the government is supposed to be there to protect you against fraud and force. And you do have a First Amendment for worshiping how you see fit. And if that's being intruded upon, it is incumbent on the government to step up. And that's what's going on here. So the Florida Attorney General said Microsoft has been violating its own non-discrimination and inclusivity policies. Because what Microsoft is doing is they're able to give discounts to some users, but then they were discriminating on who was getting those discounts. And it's Christian schools and churches and faith-based pregnancy resource centers. So Microsoft withheld discounts from these organizations because they have a policy or mission of discrimination based on race, color, sex, national origin, religion, age, disability, gender identity or expression, marital status, pregnancy, sexual orientation, political affiliation, union membership, or veteran status, all the things. And within there, because Microsoft is fundamentally evil, it's Bill Gates after all, they said that Christian-based organizations, churches, schools, crisis resource centers, because they're not in the belief that there's more a million genders out there, or that it's a good thing to murder all the babies, that is something that is discriminatory, and as a result, they're not entitled to the discount. But by doing that, the Attorney General for the state of Florida is arguing, and effectively, I think, that the Microsoft Corporation is violating civil rights laws in the state of Florida. He's bringing a lawsuit against Microsoft. So, promoting general welfare, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Good on the Attorney General from Florida. We can move on over to some economic stuff here. And this one, I think, comes from Washington Post. Yep, the Washington Post. Democracy dies in darkness. And They hide a lot of the problems here. They just threw a headline where they make the battle go between the different generations. The millennials hate the boomers, and the boomers hate Generation X, and there's all this misunderstanding along them. And it's not class warfare. I guess it's generation warfare. But from this piece, Washington Post, Democracy Dies in Darkness, headline, How Baby Boomers Got So Rich and Why Their Kids Are Unlikely to Catch Up. Let's just start the war now, right, between them. Well, baby boomers hold more than $85 trillion in assets. That means that they're rich, and that means they're evil. Or Washington Post, let me just proffer the following. Maybe baby boomers are the oldest people in America right now, which would mean that they had more time on earth to earn an income that would be invested, and they've been invested in certain things longer. And because investments, if done smartly, typically go up in value, they would have more of a time to benefit from it. But they're mean because they're baby boomers, according to the Washington Post, which wants to stir up some controversy between the various generations in America. Americans 75 or older bought homes and invested in stocks well before those assets exploded in value. Baby boomers entered the labor force during decades of strong economic growth, rising productivity, and relatively high real wages. Those are all true things. They were in their prime earning and saving years during long bull markets. When Washington Post did that happen? Oh, it was in the 1980s and 1990s when we weren't in the business of giving out so much welfare. In the 1990s, when we had a president who was saying that welfare queens were a problem. Democrat, by the way. They faced lower tuition and healthcare costs. Well, why did tuition and healthcare costs go up? Would it be because we enabled the government through a positive liberties, almost understanding of the way it's supposed to function with the social compact to provide for our general welfare by giving out student loans, or to take over a sixth of the United States economy because we had to pass Obamacare? If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your care, you can keep your care. The biggest lie that was told in 2009. It seems like every time that we go away from the original mission statement, promoting a general welfare that is pretty clear in the opening sentence of our Constitution, when we default to the exact opposite of that, we make things go worse. And because of the convenient timing or inconvenient timing, depending on what your generation is, you've got the baby boomers who have benefited from a smaller government, from one that was actually interested in the prime directive of promoting what real general welfare is, versus the folks that came after them, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, who are now existing in a time of a government that wants to exist off a charter of positive liberties, which Barack Obama really likes, his line of thinking. And every time that we've gone towards more government, it's caused our people to suffer, not thrive. Exactly the opposite of it. But that's just me on this hobbyist podcast articulating what I think is probably the fairest assessment. But again, hobbyist podcast, I'll leave it up to WAPO here, because Democracy Dies in Darkness, to educate me a little bit further about how bad the baby boomers are because they benefited from a time where government didn't take over their entire lives. Now, this gets into some of the housing problems that exist, which are true. And I think that it's been a matter here for even our current administration in the White House to address housing. And we'll get to a piece adjoining that as an update comes with the new proposal for a 50-year mortgage. But just a couple of facts here, and I won't kill you with the numbers. Let's go back 50 years. The median home price, which means that if you listed every single house out, the one that's in the middle, was $42,800. But we got to adjust for inflation because our government has continued to print and borrow and spend money to the point where all those dollars that you were putting in your bank become worth less and worth less until they become worthless. So $42,000 in 1976 would actually be, by 2025 dollars, $242,000. Well done, federal government. So $242,000, though, is still way, way cheaper than houses are today, because today's median home prices are over $400,000. So the apples to apples comparison, it is true. Houses are more expensive now. And also it's worth noting that before coronavirus, which was not that long ago, 5 years, the median home price was $320,000. And that was when the government spent a whole bunch of more money into the system and again made all those dollars worth less and less until they became worthless. Now, I think it's also worth noting as throwaway lines here on the topic of promoting the general welfare, there are also decisions that are part of this. You have to be responsible. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, that obligates you to make good decisions, to actually be responsible. If you make bad decisions, and we all make mistakes, if you make a mistake, you have to own it. There could be some long-term consequences to it. So there are some decisions that the non-boomers are making, which might not be to their best interest. So one of those would be delaying buying a starter house. So many people are saying, I'm going to wait for my forever home. Well, that is going to deny you the opportunity to buy a house that is not where you're going to stay forever. And spoiler, there's no such thing as a forever home, because have you met an empty nester? They typically downgrade away from their forever home because they don't need it anymore. But if you wait and you wait, you miss out on that starter home where maybe you could build up a little bit of equity, a little bit of value. And then when you sell that house, you have a little bit of extra money to put as a down payment for the next house. But the latter generations aren't doing that today. And they're also not investing because they don't trust the markets at all. I understand that to a certain extent. I think the reason that our stock markets have got up and up and up is because the dollars being thrown into them are not worth as much. But at the same time, if you look at historical trends, failing to invest even a small amount over time and actually take advantage of compound interest year over year over year, which was something that was taught to people in school. Probably the boomers learned some personal finance tips back in the day, as opposed to looking at underrepresented groups in the context of the Civil War, or learning about the caliphate in the 8th century. They learned some things about how to balance a checkbook, because at that point, the government, which was in the business of government schools, again, more government is always bad, but at that point, at least, when the boomers were in school, the government wasn't as involved and had a better understanding of promoting general welfare. And they thought, you know what? We're going to make sure that people are educated on how to invest their money so that they won't be so reliant on the federal government, which is very, very known for its ability to handle finances to the tune of negative return on investment with Social Security. And maybe they could prosper as opposed to being on the dole. But it's different now. And I think so many of the younger generations, the millennials, the Gen Z, they're now averse to doing that. And they're setting themselves behind the curve. And they're going to be suffering the consequences of that, not just now, but into the future, particularly as we continue to spend more and more money. And we're spending more and more money. So we have dollars that are in the system that are not able to buy as much stuff because there's just too many dollars out there. And we have a housing shortage. So now there's the idea, and we talked about it a couple episodes back, about the 50-year mortgage, promoting the general welfare. This is an idea that the government is going to allow because the government has to get involved in loans for homes. I don't know where it says that. It certainly didn't say it in the preamble, unless you have a different interpretation of promoting general welfare, which we do. It's not there. But we're now defaulting to the Constitution, which is supposed to be negative liberties. It's going to be positive liberties. So the government has to get involved in the housing crisis. This piece comes from NPR. And you know that 50-year mortgages are bad because NPR says that they're good. Headline: is a 50-year mortgage really that much crazier than a 30-year one? Yes. Yes, it's insane. But let NPR tell you the opposite. I'll keep my mind open. First of all, the reality is most homeowners ditch their mortgage well before its end date. Some refinance, others move. Typical American homeowner spends less than 12 years in their home. But if you're paying out over 50 years, then you're not building up the equity over 12 years. So I guess we're not going to assess that. 30-year mortgages date back to the Depression era. That was when we got as close as we had at that point to having a Marxist president. FDR, who refused to give up power, was elected president 4 times. Depression era, when the government sponsored the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and they said, you're going to buy mortgages from private lenders because it says it in the good and plenty clause of the Constitution, which is written in invisible ink on the back of the Declaration of Independence. That's when the government got more involved, like it did for education, like it did for healthcare. We got more and more away from promoting general welfare in the form of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and more towards sweet, sweet government cash. And actually, NPR says that at that point, we had to socialize, you mean communism, socialize mortgages. Another problem with the America's weird system of ubiquitous fixed rate mortgages is that it may weaken the Fed's ability to juice the economy. Oh, you mean a private quasi-government bank that controls interest and isn't accountable to the American people, and we don't have the ability to audit and endeavors to create inflation and says it's actually a good thing for your dollar to become less valuable by 2% every single year? This is the problem with the mortgages. That's why the government had to get involved in it, because you were taking away its ability to juice the economy instead of staying out of the economy, because I don't think it says anything about the economy in our founding documents. Stay away every single time. Every single time the government gets involved in something, it makes it worse. And it doesn't have to be for a nefarious purpose. They might truly believe that they are promoting the general welfare, but they don't understand the term welfare. They think of it as in the FDR sense, the Barack Obama sense. They want to give out that sweet government cash because people can't be trusted to make decisions on their own behalf to pursue their own happiness. Ugh. Who believes in that? That's an old dusty document notion. NPR again, and they're again saying how good 50-year mortgages are, which lets us know that they're bad. In other words, 50-year mortgage would not be a 50-year trap. It would basically serve as another option on the menu that the government allows you to have, by the way, because you can't just go to a bank and say, hey, can you give me a 16-year mortgage? That doesn't exist. The government has to approve it. And every time the government gets involved, things get worse. Now, the NPR doesn't recognize things like maybe deporting 30, 40, 50 million illegal aliens could free up some housing. Overall, greater supply would bring down the prices, basic economics. No, instead, what NPR recommends is that we build more homes, which would probably need some illegal aliens to build. And we need government education on finances. Well, I just articulated how back in the day, there was some modicum of government education on it. Do you trust the current government, though? The one that's funding, to a certain extent, NPR to say that 50-year mortgages are a good thing? Do you trust that government to go out there and educate the population about proper finances? Or are they going to default to the other interpretation of promoting the general welfare? And they're doing that to such an extent in the education system. They're actually imposing a tax on kids in school today. This is a wild interpretation. This is a wild way of looking at it. I appreciate when people kind of think outside the box. This is a piece, it comes from the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, but it is a truly interesting concept. The headline: declining K through 12 achievement adds up to a lifetime tax on students, because the government got involved in education to such an extent, people are losing out on lifetime earnings. So the background: government's fiscal problems could be solved by an 8% income tax surcharge. He's not actually advocating for it, just using that as an explainer. Nobody has suggested it because it is an absurd idea. True. Now, coronavirus hits, schooling became very hard, but our scores, our academic scores for kids, had already been falling since 2013. So we are now over a decade of falling school achievement scores. The lifetime earnings of today's average student will be an estimated 8% lower than that of students in 2013, because they're not getting the necessary education to thrive. We're not promoting general welfare. With spending per student at more than 2.5 times what it was 50 years ago, our reading has completely flatlined. Today's education system remains more concerned with adult employment than with student achievement. We got to make sure the teachers have their jobs. Actually, we got to make sure they have their jobs to not teach. They should probably do remote school or there should be an administrator, or it should be a union rep who uses their time to argue on behalf of paying teachers more money and having less billable time on your dime. That's what we should have, as opposed to actually educating the kids so that they make sure they can read, maybe do a little bit of math so they can balance a checkbook. And as a result, the kids are going to suffer long term. That doesn't seem like it's promoting our general welfare. But how can we actually correct it? And I'm going to actually go out on a limb here. Harvard might be in talks to do the right thing. So this one comes from the Washington Post as well. And it's about a Harvard trade school. And it's because of some negotiations going on between the White House and the ivory tower academic institutions that are out there. Harvard Trade School, it's not as far-fetched as it might seem. Now, the reality is employers across the country can't find enough skilled workers, and there are millions of people applying for jobs, and they're not able to land those jobs. There are more than 40 million workers stuck in low-wage jobs, and they don't have any sort of economic security. Many job seekers don't know how to get the training for in-demand jobs. They're just saying like, hey, I need work, but what sort of skill set do I need? Many employers haven't actually invested in on-the-job training. And then some community colleges out there, I would argue most of the community colleges out there sort of see themselves as a stepping stone to the four-year academic institution. They're not really interested in training people into the skills that they need to do the trades, do plumbing, do HVAC, do electrical work, being a barber, being a hairdresser, all of those skills, which can be acquired at a community college. That's sort of shuffled to the back of the priorities. The priorities now in many community colleges across the country is no. You just got to get the core classes done here. And we know you're going to go on to the state school or the private school, the four-year institution after that, where you can take a major in underwater basket weaving because, who cares? You're just getting a federal loan anyway because the feds are involved in it. They're promoting your general welfare. But Harvard is in discussions with the Trump administration about changing that. Now, Harvard actually does a certain modicum of trade schools, which I didn't know. Now, the president said this fall that his administration is close to an agreement with Harvard to pay $500 million to operate trade schools. I don't like the government getting involved with this at all. $500 million seems like a problem if it's coming from our pockets. I understand the sentiment. I think that if there's a market there, there should be. I think the president should just be out using the bully pulpit saying, I would like to see Harvards of the world open up more trade school opportunities. And then when there's a higher demand, you can bet that the Harvards of the world will do it, or they will go defunct and die because they failed to meet the demand that's out there. But as I said before, Harvard actually has been doing this, and maybe they could just expand the effort out. They've offered widely accessible continuing education classes. They also offer workforce development programs such as career counseling and job fairs and skill training for work in construction trades. So that's good. And I think that promotes the general welfare, particularly if we have a need in this country and we have needs on both ends. We have a need from the employers and the employees. Why can't we do what's necessary to marry these two together as opposed to just beating our heads against the wall and continuing to put people into debt to take classes and things that they are never going to use, they're not interested in, and they're not useful to our growing economy and not useful to our ability to prosper as a country. So some good and some bad there, and just a little bit of education, I guess, of the Harvards of the world apparently do have a track record for trying to bring people up to speed. I would like to see that expanded out. I think that would be an objectively good thing. Okay, and now let's do some promoting the general welfare in the terms of, we have First Amendment that entitles us to worship how we see fit. Now, there's a case that's out of the state of Maine. And this is, again, the government getting involved in intruding on people's ability to not just worship how they see fit, but raise their kids how they see fit. Here's a news story about it, and we'll talk about it.
And John, Emily Bickford says a custody order banning her from bringing her daughter to Calvary Chapel Church in Westbrook is unconstitutional. Her attorney, Matt Staver with Liberty Counsel, says the ruling violates her First Amendment rights. The order was issued in December of last year, a district judge ruling in favor of the girl's father, Matthew Bradeen, saying that some of the church's teachings were psychologically harmful to the girl. The order allows Bradeen to solely decide on his daughter's involvement with Calvary Chapel. When it comes to any other religious organization, the parents share rights. Bickford's lawyers filed an appeal back in April. Today, the justices heard about a half hour of arguments from both sides before they took recess. After the hearing, Bickford and her lawyer speaking out.
This is a nuclear option where you give total authority to one parent to make decisions regarding religion over the other parent who's a fit parent.
She would like to come to church. She misses her friends.
That's Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel, who I've met once. Seems like a pretty good guy who's been a stalwart to defend religious liberty matters there. Here's the background for the story, which is incredibly disturbing. And tell me if this is promoting some sort of general welfare or further government intrusion on your rights. So the main mother, her name is Emily Bickford, appealing a custody order that gave the child's father, Matthew Bradeen, exclusive control over all religious decisions. They have a 12-year-old daughter. Now, the court originally found that the teachings that the mother was bringing the daughter to church for, they involved fallen angels and messages about eternal suffering. So Christianity. And it caused the 12-year-old psychological distress. Good. That's what going to church is supposed to do. It's not supposed to be high fives and backslaps as you're doing the wrong thing. I think that's blasphemy. But we have a court system here, which is very interested in the child's general welfare. The general welfare being a loss of an immortal soul. Seems like every time the government gets involved, things get worse. So Matt Staver is fighting on behalf of this mom, Emily Bickford. He'll wait to see what the main judges see. And I would imagine if they goes the wrong way, and in Maine, who knows, that it will be appealed up to a Supreme Court. And if Supreme Court takes it up, that would be a nationwide decision. And with the way that it's presently constituted, who knows? Who knows? I mean, you'd hope that you'd have the Clarence Thomases, the Samuel Alitos go the right way. But who knows with the Amy Barretts of the world, if they happen to wake up on the wrong side of the bed, they might rule in favor of the communists. Now, that's a troublesome one. But I want to, as we're talking about religious liberty and general welfare, let's close it out today with this executive order and an adjoining piece from Alliance Defending Freedom. So the executive order comes from the White House. It's entitled Fostering the Future for American Children and Families. Now, this is a decision it's sort of setting out the framework. It's not really definitive, so it's not gone far enough yet, but it is trending in a pretty decent direction. The executive order instructs the Department of Health and Human Services to identify states or local policies that may discourage religious families from fostering. Essentially, what's gone on in some of these leftist, communist, Marxist, Satanist enclaves is they're saying that if you want to foster a kid, you can't take them to church. If you want to foster a kid, you have to let them cut off their penis and testicles and say that, oh, yes, Harry, you can become Sally. So it's discriminatory against people who have a traditional understanding, a biblical understanding of the world. People that probably subscribe to ideas that are an old dusty document. A First Amendment says you're allowed to do that. Now, the review could lead to new federal guidance, regulatory changes, or funding directives aimed at pressuring states to review rules that the administration believes improperly limit participation by religious foster parents. They shouldn't have to decide between how they worship or if they want to foster a kid. So just throw it up there. Alliance Defending Freedom applauded the Trump order protecting foster care from gender ideology. It is just a first step into it. We'll have to see what sort of recommendations come out about it. But if we're going to talk about a traditional way that you would expect the social compact to operate in this country, where the government exists to punish evil, and if it doesn't, it essentially punishes good by, in essence, its failure to follow the prime directive to punish evil, to protect its citizenry against fraud and force. Now the government's doing something that's objectively good, or at least endeavoring to do it with that executive order, and they deserve some congratulations and some thanks for doing that. That's definitely in more in the sense of a understanding that we have a system of negative liberties. You shouldn't have a government saying you got to worship one way or another. It should be you do what you want to do, you pursue your happiness. Okay, that's going to wrap it up for today on the American Radicals podcast. We churned and burned through quite a bit today, but I will not leave you without a nice biblical worldview and a fun palate cleanse, a blast from the past. So first, to our biblical worldview, comes from Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 7. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Now, Jeremiah is talking about the Israelites being in exile at the time. They'd been pretty naughty and they got carried away. I think it's sort of relevant to what we're talking about today, promoting general welfare. Pray for our government to actually return to its prime directive, not be so involved, not have an understanding of that welfare is just giving out that sweet, sweet government cash, getting involved in things like religious worship. Instead, stepping back and allowing the mission statement to have its day, allow the people to have their life and their liberties and pursue their happiness. That is what you're supposed to protect. And that's going to involve economic success, where we're not having the government come in and impact the housing markets. We're not having the educational pursuits that are out there, where we're saying that, well, it's not important to teach these kids anything. We just need to ask them to ask why and why and why. They don't need to know about the Civil War. They just need to know who the underrepresented classes were so they can resent their history. We have to build a country that is the shining city that we have aspired to be, is the reason that the right people actually want to immigrate here. And when they come in legally, they want to stay here, not for the free stuff, but so they can actually fold into the culture, be in the fondue, in the melting pot, not part of any sort of a borscht. And to our palate cleanse of the day, how many people have Siri on their phone? I don't, because I don't like to be tracked. But I found this nice video of the woman who is the Siri voice, who is an actual person. And she came and made her appearance nationwide.
Siri, who is the voice of Siri?
I am the voice of Siri.
There she is. I kind of got chills. Her real name is Susan Bennett. She's here with us this morning. Let's ask her questions. Siri, why is 1 foot longer than the other? Siri, what is the driving time from New York to LA?
Nice to meet you.
Siri,
Hello.
you happy to be here this morning?
I'm sorry, Michaela. I cannot answer those questions.
Really
cool.
Susan Bennett, what a delight to meet.
That's kind of off-putting, isn't it? I kind of feel sorry for that woman. For the rest of her life, people are just kind of be scratching their head, being like, I know you from somewhere. But maybe she got a nice payday out of it. All right, guys, we have reached the end of the American Radicals podcast for Thursday. Be back with you for Saturday, grab bag edition, 10:30 Eastern time, rumble.com/amradpod. Also, YouTube, the American Radicals podcast, iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, at X America News, all the places. Okay, make sure that you please give us a like, a follow, a subscribe, a share, all the things. Try to share out the brand as wide as we possibly can on this hobbyist podcast. So back to you again, Saturday, 10:30 Eastern time. Until then, guys, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.